The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus entered a village where a woman whose name was Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary, who sat beside the Lord at his feet, listening to him speak. Martha, burdened with much serving, came to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me by myself to do the serving? Tell her to help me." The Lord said to her in reply, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken away from her." The Gospel of the Lord.
At the end of this first reading here from the book of Genesis, Sarah is told that she will be having a child. She's 80-something years old. So you imagine, I don't know how many of you are 80-something. Imagine somebody coming to you and saying, "You're going to have a child." And of course, Sarah kind of probably responded the same way. She laughed, you know. And so that great gift of life, to have that great gift, and of course Abraham and Sarah waited a very long time to have that gift, and to, of course, all the more are they going to appreciate that gift of children. And I think of, like, you look at Facebook, you know, people will post things about their children and everything. I love to see that stuff. Children are such a gift. They're such a gift to our society. They're such a gift to us. The joy that we have and seeing children and their discovery of the world, and how we can discover the world in a new way through their eyes. It's such an awesome thing to have that through our children. And so we have that grace of children, that great gift of children. Hopefully that's what we see in children. And of course in children, children are conceived ideally in the context of marriage. And so marriage is truly a gift to us as well. And to understand what marriage really is, and the gift that marriage is, and it's very similar with the gift of children. A lot of times, you know, with the high divorce rate today, marriage is really hard to maintain. It's really hard to maintain, but it's a lot of people end up in divorce. And what I notice is a lot of times, especially younger couples, when they're getting married, usually what they're thinking about is, how am I going to receive love? They're thinking about, this great, my spouse is going to love me. It's all about love, and I'm going to receive all this love. But you know, when I talk to people who have been married for many years, they realize that marriage isn't so much about how much love I'm going to receive, but how much I am involved in loving my spouse, in my children. They recognize the responsibility of giving love as opposed to receiving love. And that's really one of the most important parts of marriage, to mature and to grow. So even when I talk to people who've been married for a long time, they always say, you know, I was really selfish when I first got married. I was an idiot when I first got married. I was always thinking of myself when I first got married. And that's the journey that we have in marriage life. It teaches us to sacrifice ourselves for the good of the other. So in marriage, we find ourselves, and the more we're participating in that marriage, we find our fulfillment in loving the other, not so much in receiving and looking at the other to obtain something from them. And really the difference is here, and it's kind of a different way of looking at marriage. It's a very different way of looking at marriage, about what can I give as opposed to what can I get. God created us for love. God created us for love, and marriage is for love. And children are to be conceived in love, just like God conceived us in His love. That's the whole point of it. That's why marriage is supposed to be an image of God. That creation would be made in love. It's not just a pragmatic thing. And so, because it's not such merely pragmatic, is conception and love. And so we learn to give ourselves, to sacrifice ourselves. And when doing that, we look at the vocations. Like for me, as a priest, that's not my job, that's my vocation. When I was ordained, my very being was changed. I was no longer just a man, I became a priest. Now I am, in a certain sense, a father. And that was my being. My being was changed. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, forever. And so now my being is dedicated to service. So it's a vocation. The vocations are a vocation of service, not getting. So when I was ordained a priest, I was ordained to serve you, and that's my very being. So my very being, the purpose of my being is to serve you. And for me to have fulfillment in my being as God ordained me is to serve you. I find more joy the more I serve you, to exhaust myself for you, just like parents might exhaust themselves for their children, and there is great joy. Parents might go to bed and they are out as soon as their pillows hit the bed because they're exhausting themselves for their children. But it feels good. It feels good to exhaust themselves for their children, to give of themselves. That's why it feels so good to help out with St. Vincent de Paul. Because we're made for love. Not so much receiving love. Jesus has already given his love on the cross and in the resurrection. To complete that cycle, we have to give of ourselves, and that's what marriage demands. To give of ourselves. That is where we will find fulfilling. And that's where, the more I talk to people who have been married for many years, they will tell you that they find their marriage fulfilling because they give of themselves, not because they look to get. Because when you look to get, it turns that self-gift into getting. So to love others, you are to give. But in marriage, if we are looking at the other to get, it turns love upside down, and it no longer is love, but it becomes lust. A matter of getting from the other instead of giving. And then as life goes on, as marriage goes on, we start to mature and discover that reality. To give of ourselves is our fulfillment. Just like me as a priest. In my vocation as a priest, I give of myself, and the more I give of myself, the more joy there is. The more joy there is in spouses when they're openly willing to give of each other freely. That means, man, you really have to discern well when you're married. Who is this other person? Hopefully you're not going to be taken advantage of. And I hate to say this, even if they're good people, you will be taken advantage of because we're sinners. We're learning this. It's a process of learning to give of ourselves. And God knows that when we get married. So when we get married, we might think we know what we're entering into. We really don't. It's not till after years have gone by that we realize the gift of marriage and the demands that it makes. And it's only in that context of marriage where we have that ability to dedicate ourselves to each other that children are to be brought forth. And it's to be open to being brought forth, because children encourage us, children challenge us to give of ourselves even more. In marriage, you are called to be interdependent upon each other, and that's holy. That's good. To be interdependent with each other, to be intertwined with each other, to be one flesh with each other in that way. It's a scary thought to do that, but it's also joyful to endeavor to love as God has loved us. So as good as marriage is, as much as you give in your marriage, when you have children, you're diving a lot more deeper into that self-gift. When you're husband and wife, the day you get married, your being changed is just like my being changed. My being changed, I became a priest. When you get married, you're no longer man and woman, but you become husband and wife in that way. When you have children, it's even deeper. You're not just husband and wife or man and woman, you're father and mother. As soon as conception happens, your very being is being changed. And it's being changed into the love that God designed you to be as your vocation calls you. So you notice, like you see parents love their children, and they're like all gaga over their children. They're taking pictures of them all the time. They're just rejoicing in their children so much. You ask any parent, what's the most precious gift you got? They don't even bat an eye. My children. No questions, hands down, nothing can compare to my children. Yet the world tells us, no, don't have children. Mitigate that. Mitigate that joy, mitigate the gift. But when we see today, as God sees, it's a gift to us because we learn to love, because as you are interdependent with each other, your spouse can still go out and make a living. Your children, when they're born, they are 100 dependent on you. Food, diapers, everything. They are 100 dependent on you. That means you have to be willing to sacrifice yourself, to get up in the middle of the night, to change diapers, to burp the baby, to feed them, whatever their need is. It means self-sacrifice. It means doing good for the other. It means that sacrifice and that love is deepened. So God teaches us by giving us children to love more and to go deeper in that sacrifice of love. And then there come a day when that child is no longer dependent on you. And then they have to go and to say, yes, go. It is good. It is holy. And imagine this. This is the love that Jesus has for us. When Jesus died on the cross for us, do we realize that we are totally 100% dependent upon Him and upon that sacrifice? Do we realize that as Jesus Christ is here, right on this altar, in the sacrifice, hanging on the cross for us, that we are 100 dependent upon that Eucharist that is present to us at this very Mass? As you are there, parents, for your children, getting up in the middle of the night, Jesus is all the more there for us, each and every day, 24/7, and yes, even after we get old, supplying for us each and every breath we take. Because He not only created us, He sustains us in our being. He holds us into existence. So He's not just a creator that winds up a clock and walks away. He cares for every single need that we have. What an awesome God that He is. And that He would allow us to be a symbol of that and a model of that self-dying and that self-giving love in marriage and in children. And that is why we do not want to shun children, that great precious gift in our lives. That's why we don't want to contracept, have abortions, and all of these things. Children are not a burden, but they are a gift. They are a means by which we learn to love in a deeper way. They are a means by which we get to heaven. Anybody who is a parent, if you are a parent, your children are a means by which you get to heaven. If you are married, your spouse is a means by which you get to heaven by the very way you love that other, not by the way you get what you want from the other. So that's what God calls us to do. What an awesome gift that children are. What an awesome gift that God would call us to such great heights, to love as He has loved us.
When peace